Well, good morning. Um, it's kind of a cool, damp morning here today. But anyway, let me show you Rocky. He's having a sleep at the foot of the bed there. We'll see if we can see Rocky. There he is. I don't know what you can see, so I'm moving the phone around because I can't see what you can see. But there he is. I think he just got a little annoyed there because he was trying to sleep and I'm bothering him. I saw the one eye open. He's kind of give me a look like, oh, you again? Anyway, I'm going to tell you a story today about something really dumb that I did when I was 3 years old. I guess, all little kids do dumb things, but this particular thing could have got me killed. So it was a particularly dumb thing anyway. As I told you in earlier episodes of these this ongoing saga or whatever, which has been my life. Um, we lived in a trailer park when I was a little kid called Charlie Anderson's Trailer Park. And we lived in a mobile home there. We left there in 1972, but that's where we lived for a couple of years. Um, Prior to that, when I was a little baby, we lived in a village called Merricksville. Um, and we actually lived in an apartment which was above the liquor store, and the apartment across the hall from us was above the bank. And there's a whole story there that I'll tell someday too, because there's an interesting story about my dad's car, which was a 1957 Chev convertible, actually, believe it or not. Of course, this was in 1968, so it was just an old used car. It was just an old used car. Wasn't worth anything really. It was a red 1957 Chev convertible. Be worth a fortune now, but in those days it was just an old junker, you know. But there's a story about that car and a couple of bank robbers, believe it or not. And so I'll tell you that story someday. But the story I want to tell you today is a story about a treat that turned out not to be a very good treat. And you know what I'm talking about when I tell the story. My dad, he was a tool and die maker and an industrial mechanic in 1970, 71, 72, in there, you know, when I was like 3 years old, in that era. And he was that for most of his life, really. He had also done other jobs. He'd driven a truck. He'd been a television repairman. He had worked in factories on production lines. He'd done all that stuff too. But from about the mid-60s on, he was an industrial mechanic and a tool and die maker, and a really good one too. Actually, you know, he could build things that most people wouldn't be able to build. He saved the companies he worked for a lot of money, and he could even weld aluminum in the 1970s when a lot of people thought it couldn't be done. But he knew the technique to weld aluminum just by moving it around with the tip of the flame, just slowly heating it up, getting it to run, turning it into liquid so it would run, and then moving it with the tip of his flame. He could actually weld aluminum. And like I say, I think now that's common knowledge, but in the 1970s there were very few people who knew how to do that, and a lot of people didn't even believe it could be done. And my dad, he'd have to be out of our place early. He had to drive 12 miles to get to his job. At that time, he was working in a wool factory. And part of his job was that he had to get all the lights on and get all the machines running, which meant walking around the factory to these massive breaker panels and flicking all the breakers on to turn all the machines on and all the lights on and everything. And then he had to check and make sure that all the machinery was working properly. And he had to repair anything that was broken and hopefully get that done before the production workers started coming in, like at 6 or 7 in the morning. So that meant he left our place around 4 in the morning. Now, my mom, of course, she didn't have to be up early like my dad did. And I was a toddler, so I didn't have to be up early like my dad did either. But, of course, as a toddler, I was up early. Whether I had to be or not made no difference. I was up with I don't know, whatever gets up early, I was up with it anyway. So, up with the chickens, I guess. Anyway, of course, as a 3-year-old, unsupervised, in the house, what did I do one morning? But I started poking around in cupboards. Now, my parents, they had a camera. It was a big, clunky old Polaroid land camera, one of the early instant cameras. I never actually saw my parents use it. My mom used to use a Kodak camera with film in it to take pictures, but I never actually saw that Polaroid camera used. I think maybe the film for it was too expensive or something, or the pictures weren't that great a quality, or I don't really know, but it was never used that I can remember. But it was up in the cupboard, and I knew it was there, and I like to play with it sometimes. Sometimes I'd be allowed to play with it. So I got up into the cupboard in the kitchen where this camera was. I pulled out the drawers in the cabinet, and I climbed up the drawers, turned them into steps. So I was able to get up on the top of the cabinet, and then I could get the door open there and get the camera out. Well, I get the camera out, but what do I see when I'm getting the camera out but a nice box of something? And I could read just a little bit. I wasn't like what I would say. I wasn't a particularly good reader. I was 3 years old, but I could read some words anyway, which I think is pretty good for 3 years old. But anyway, I could read some words, and one of the words I could read was the word treat. I knew the word treat. I better not say that too loud because Rocky's sleeping over there. I'll see that little gray head pop up if I say that word too loud, and he'll start meowing and carrying on. Because he knows that word too. He can't read it, but he knows it. Anyway, so I see that word, and it's printed on a box. This box is like a dark green, almost like an army green box. And there's a red circle in the center of the box, on the front of the box, And in the red circle, there's a picture of a mouse. And the mouse is carrying one of those old pasteboard type suitcases we used to have years ago. So he's leaving, But of course, all I saw was the word treat. And of course, the name of the stuff was Mouse Treat. Now, I think you probably already figured out what this stuff was. And it was not a treat for a human being, or for a mouse either, for that matter. It'd kill either one. But I didn't know that. And I just saw the word treat, and I thought, ooh, a box of treats. Yes, I must have them. 3 years old, dumb as a post. Could read a little bit, but dumb as a post. Anyway, pull the box down, I do. And I shove my hand into it, and I pull up a handful of this stuff out, and it looks like oatmeal. And I'm thinking, oh, dry oatmeal, that doesn't look very good, really. But it said treat on the box, so it must be good, because everyone knows a treat is good. That's a rule, A treat is good. So what do? I cram a handful of this stuff into my mouth, and I come to the conclusion real quickly that maybe a treat isn't always good, Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there's such a thing as a bad treat. It was an unthinkable prospect, really, but still, that, I had to accept the possibility, at least, that maybe a treat isn't always a treat. So what do? I spit as much of that out as I can into the kitchen sink, and I go about my business. I've got my Polaroid land camera there, so I can document my stupidity, I suppose, if it had any film in it, that is, which it didn't. But still, what do? I go up the hall and into my parents' bedroom, and my mom's laying there in bed, and she's half asleep. She's sort of awake, but not completely. And she looks and she sees I've got the camera. And she says, "Where'd you get the camera?" And I says, "Out of the cupboard in the kitchen." The cupboard. What cupboard? She says. The cupboard with the treat in it. And she says, treat? What do you mean treat? What cupboard are you talking about? She was half asleep, I think I kind of woke her up when I came in. So she said, what cupboard are you talking about? And I said, the cupboard with the treat in it, with the picture of the mouse with the suitcase. Well, she woke up real quick then, and she says, oh my God, did you eat any of that? And I said, yeah, I did, but it was no good, so I spit it out. Well, I had swallowed some of it, I suppose. I must have. Anyway, she gets out of that bed and she runs to the kitchen, and of course she can see the mess I've made with this, and the box of my mouse treat is on the counter, and there's stuff scattered around. She can see that I spit it into the sink and everything. But some of it had gotten into my system, and I started to crave water. I felt like I needed to drink water. And I guess that's how this stuff would kill a mouse, because a mouse would eat it, and then they'd need to drink water. And when they drank water, the water would react with it in such a way that it would cause them to internally hemorrhage, and they'd bleed to death, basically, internally. That's how the poison worked. Well, I start crying, begging for water, and of course my mom's not going to give me any water. Excuse me. Sinuses are a little buggered up today. Because she knows how the poison works, Of course, my dad was at work 12 miles away. So, anyway, our neighbor, Harry Matheson, Maddie Matheson's husband, I mentioned these people in other videos there. They were the grandparents of my friend Debbie Matheson. Really nice people, anyway. And I mentioned, too, that Harry had the newest car around where we live, which was a 1969, was a black 1969 Dodge Polara 4-door sedan. Stood out at that time as a new car, because you just didn't see cars that new very much around there. It was only like a year or two old. I guess 2 years old at the time, which was really new for a car back then, especially with poor folk living around. Like we were all poor folk around there, so I mean, the oldest vehicle around there at the time was a 1939 Chev half-ton truck that was badly rusted out. So you can, and I mean, Harry Matheson had the newest vehicle anyway, and he was retired, so he wasn't working. All the other cars were gone because the men were all working. So my mom calls Harry and Maddie Matheson up in a panic, and she said, can you come and take us to the hospital? Tommy has gotten into some poison. So anyway, he come around with the car and he took us to the hospital. And the nurse in the emergency ward, she told me, she said, I'm going to give you some breakfast. I didn't feel like eating. My guts were burning at that point. And she says, and she gave me this piece of toast, but it was soaking in a pan of some liquid, and it was all soggy and everything, and I didn't want to eat it. I didn't want to eat anyway because I wasn't feeling good, but I really didn't want to eat that soggy toast. And she said, no, you're going to eat it. And she made me eat it. I took one bite of it, and I just projectile vomited everywhere. The toast was soaked in syrup of hepatica, which anybody who knows about syrup of hepatica will tell you, that's the purpose of that stuff is to make you vomit. And that's what it did anyway. And the nurse said to my mother, she said, it's a good thing he ate this and vomited, because otherwise we'd had to pump his stomach, Anyway, they kept me in the hospital for a few days after that. And it wasn't a whole lot of fun anyway. And like I say, I learned a valuable lesson anyway that day. I learned that you can't judge a book by its cover or a box by its label. And you can't assume that everything is a treat just because it says it is. There's a lot of things in this life that present themselves as treats, but they're really more trouble than they're worth. And that applies to an awful lot of things. So anyway, at 3 years old, I learned a bit of a lesson anyway. And every experience has a purpose, and I suppose for me that was the purpose of that experience. I learned a lesson. And I was more careful about what I ate from then on, I'll tell you. I learned you don't eat just from any box, and you don't assume that everything is a treat just because it says it is. So there you go. There's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I really should make a video and tell the story about the bank robbers and my dad's old car. That's a whole other story. I should do that, you know. And I think I will do that right after this, but I'll have to load this one up first, because otherwise, if I don't do that, then I won't have enough room on the phone to tell the other story. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I hope you're all having a good day. Me and Rocky are having a good day so far. No major calamities, so that's a good day. And I hope you guys also are not having any major calamities and are having kind of a good day. Talk to y'all later.